Now we take a look at Thomas Jefferson's America, and we'll first look at the person known as Thomas Jefferson, one of the marble men who we have elevated to almost semi-divine status, but was a very human being like everybody else. We'll see then the election of 1800, a watershed election, the first Jefferson administration, Jeffersonian America, and then another person in the Jeffersonian era, and that is John Marshall, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. His first great case, Marbury versus Madison, and then finally the shores of Tripoli. I shall not ask anything from this page in any sort of tests or anything, but the person of Thomas Jefferson is a very complex figure. If you looked at Thomas Jefferson today and measured him by today's standards, he would never have been elected president. Very shy, with a very high, squeaky voice, very introverted, very loath to be in public places, very introspective as well as introverted. He was born April the 13th, 1743, the third of 8 children, to Jane Randolph of the Randolph family, and his father, Peter Jefferson, a planter and surveyor who died when Jefferson was only 14. He inherited about 5,000 acres of land and dozens of slaves near Charlottesville, Virginia, which has been in the news lately. This plantation he then called Monticello. He received a classical education and was brilliant. He attended William and Mary at the age of 16. He graduated with the highest honors at the age of 19. He was admitted to the bar in 1767. He was fluent in French and developed a love for French culture. He married Martha Wales Skelton and had 6 children. We do not think that was all the children he had, however. He is also known as a child of the Enlightenment, a polymath. That means he knew all the knowledge that existed in that day. He was fluent in many languages. He knew all sorts of science. He was an inventor and architect, a scientist and horticulturalist, a politician and author, and he was an archaeologist and paleontologist. He had a very good collection of stones, artifacts, and bones as well. And many people said that he had formulated for himself sort of a proto-theory of evolution based on his bone collection. In the election of 1800, John Adams and his running mate Charles Pinckney ran once again against Jefferson and Burr, and this was a very tough election in which there were some vicious political and personal attacks levied against both candidates, and it brought the Jefferson-Adams friendship to a temporary end, a 12-year end, I might say, because of something Abigail Adams said, and Jefferson felt slighted because John Adams had not corrected his wife. Furthermore, Hamilton's scheming drove many Federalists into the Jeffersonian camp, and the results were that many of the electors voted for Burr rather than for Adams or Pinckney, and Jefferson and Burr finished in a tie with Adams third. Well, when there's a tie in the Electoral College, the election goes to the House of Representatives with one state each getting one vote. And Hamilton convinced many Federalists in the House to vote with Jefferson against Burr. Burr did not forget this. With the idea that Aaron Burr might be elected president without a popular mandate, Virginia and Pennsylvania mobilized their militias, respectively, to prevent overturning the popular will. Nonetheless, in the end, Thomas Jefferson was affirmed president by the House of Representatives, and the 12th Amendment was then ratified in 1804, giving the electors one vote for president and one vote for vice president, rather than just simply 2 votes for president and the guy that finished in second place would become the vice president. Because Aaron Burr had challenged Jefferson for the presidency once the Electoral College had resulted in a tie, there was a great deal of ill will between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Jefferson not only has a vice president who is, shall we say, not friendly toward him, he also has a major crisis. As the Adams administration was preparing to leave office, the Federalist Party, in order to maintain some power, created a series of judgeships, clerks of court, justices of the peace, and so forth, called the Midnight Judges. They passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, and this was executed by outgoing Secretary of State and incoming Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall. So John Marshall was going from being Secretary of State to Supreme Court Chief Justice. And it was his job to deliver the commissions to all the federal judges, circuit courts, clerks, and federal marshals. But he didn't deliver all of them, and one of the people that did not get a commission delivered was a William Marbury, who was appointed Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia. Some people opine that Marshall may have done this on purpose rather than by accident. Meanwhile, Jefferson takes office and delivers a very conciliatory address. We are all Americans after an election. And he says that the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists are of like mind. He also upheld the right of peaceful dissent as sort of a slap to the Alien and Sedition Acts, which he allowed then to expire. And so Thomas Jefferson takes office, and this initiates Jeffersonian America. You see a paradigm shift take place here, a different way of doing government. See, Jefferson believed that the greatest danger to a republic was a high density of population and concentration of money and power in the hands of just a few people. Jefferson's Weltanschauung, which we call his worldview, so he did not wish to abolish manufacturing in cities. He simply wished them to remain secondary. He believed that land was the key to freedom, and therefore the more people you had settled on land into farms producing crops, the greater the nation would become. Jefferson is the first president to actually serve in Washington, D.C., and he leads a much simpler lifestyle. He rode on horseback instead of in a carriage, and he eschewed formality. Where Washington and Adams demanded that people call him Your Excellency the President, Jefferson established a tradition of calling the president simply Mr. President. One of the key players in the Jefferson economic system and in the Jefferson administration was Albert Gallatin, Secretary of the Treasury, longest serving Secretary of the Treasury. He goes in totally diametrically opposed to Alexander Hamilton and everything he stands for, and guts Hamilton's system. He enacts budget cuts to reduce the debt. He reduces staff and military, claiming that this is an infringement on our American liberty. All internal federal taxes were repealed by 1802, and he says the only way that this nation is going to survive is if we continue to expand westward expansion. The federal government will sell the lands to settlers, and then they will produce goods. They will put money in the treasury through foreign trade. Jefferson was not alone at the top of the heap in Jeffersonian America. Also with him was the Chief Justice, John Marshall, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. John Marshall was the fourth Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, not the first, although many people mistakenly believe him to be the first. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was a native of Virginia and a Federalist, and the eldest of 15 children. He was also second cousin to Thomas Jefferson, whom he did not like, nor whom Jefferson liked him. Like Jefferson, he had a classical education. He was a member of the Virginia militia during the War for Independence. He fought at Great Bridge, Brandywine, Germantown, Monmouth. He was present at Valley Forge. When the war was over and the case, the government settled down, he lost his first and only case he ever put before the Supreme Court, Ware v. Hilton. He was the minister to France during the XYZ affair. He was an opponent and then later an ally of Patrick Henry. And when he gets on the court after having served as Secretary of State, he changes the procedure of the court and begins to dominate it. And he does this by delivering the single opinion. Therefore, if the Chief Justice sides with the majority, the Chief Justice now has the ability and the privilege of delivering the majority opinion. He can waive that and has done so from time to time. But much of what you see in the Supreme Court today is established by John Marshall. The judicial branch of the federal government was long considered, up to this point, sort of an afterthought in government. The Supreme Court was supposed to be a co-equal branch, but many did not think so. And then comes the case of Marbury v. Madison of 1803, the first major test of the U.S. Supreme Court. As you recall, Marshall had not delivered all the commissions when he left office as Secretary of State, and the new Secretary of State, James Madison, was not about to deliver commissions to members of an opposite party, and so he refused to do so. William Marbury was one of those men. Appointed Justice of the Peace for the District of Columbia, William Marbury sued in the Supreme Court, saying that the Supreme Court needs to order Madison to deliver his commission. Now Marshall takes up the case, and he makes his ruling. His ruling opinion is this: Madison, the defendant and Secretary of State, should have delivered the commissions. However, under the Constitution, Marshall says that the Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction in this case. It cannot order Madison to deliver those commissions. Now, this seems like a victory for James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and the Democratic Republicans, and many of the Democratic Republicans celebrate. Meanwhile, this seems like a loss for the Federalists. However, what John Marshall has done is he has established a very important precedent, and the precedent that he establishes is called judicial review. Judicial review means that the Supreme Court now becomes the final arbiter of the Constitution. Marshall realizes that the political winds have shifted from the Federalist Party, but he controls the judicial branch of the government, and the court system are the referee of the Constitution. That's what judicial review means. In the French Quarter, the street that goes along the riverfront after North Peter Street is called Decatur Street. It's named after this man right here, Stephen Decatur, one of the first big-time heroes of the United States, a naval officer. Even though Jefferson and his administration preferred to look west toward the settlement of the territorial lands, and this painting here shows Decatur and his men leaving the Philadelphia after scuttling it. The problem was they were not able to salvage the ship and recapture it. Morocco, instead, they crept ashore and blew the ship up. Nominally